then only the BBC in England, and they would play it. We would know when they'd play it. It would be like 9:40.
Ringo Starr just turned 85, but his birthday celebration left fans worried. The Beatles drummer broke down crying during his annual Peace and Love moment. He had to cancel shows in Philadelphia and New York after getting sick. Doctors told him to rest, but something deeper seemed wrong. For the first time ever, he publicly mourned John and George during his birthday speech. His voice cracked as he spoke. What's really happening to the last surviving Beatle that has everyone so concerned? Richard Starkey was born on July 7, 1940, at 9 Madryn Street in Liverpool. That summer, German bombs were falling on the city almost every night. His parents tried to stay calm, but everything around them was shaking, and his father, a baker named Richard Starkey Sr., was already starting to drift away. When little Richard was only 3, his father left and never came back. His mother, Elsie, suddenly had to raise him alone. She worked all day as a cleaner and then spent her nights as a barmaid just to afford rent and food. In 1944, they were forced to move to a cheaper place because they couldn't keep up with the costs anymore. Then came something even worse. When Richard was 6 years old, his appendix burst. At first, it seemed like just another surgery, but something went very wrong. He caught a life-threatening infection called peritonitis and fell into a coma for days. No one was sure if he would make it. He stayed in the hospital for almost a whole year, far from his mother. And when he finally got out in May 1948, he was 8 years old and couldn't even read or count properly. But he didn't complain. He just kept going. At 13, after he had started getting tutoring to catch up in school, disaster hit again. In 1953, a tuberculosis outbreak swept through his school, and Richard got sick. He was sent to a special hospital where he had to stay for 2 years. It was lonely. No friends, no school, just silence. But one day, a nurse gave him a cotton bobbin mallet and told him to hit it against a metal cabinet, just for fun. That sound lit something up inside him. A health worker gave him a record called Bedtime for Drums, and he couldn't stop listening. That was the first time he felt like he had something of his own. He grew up in the Dingle neighborhood, one of the hardest parts of Liverpool. It was full of gang fights and danger. Richard ended up joining one just to survive. He saw beatings almost every week. And one day, he was attacked so badly by a rival group that it changed the way he saw himself forever. He was already small and quiet, but after that, he felt even more unsure of his place in the world. Music became his escape. It made him feel like he had a reason to keep going. In 1956, when he was 16, he got a job as an apprentice machinist at a factory. There, he met Roy Trafford, who loved skiffle music, a style that mixed jazz, folk, and blues. They practiced in the factory basement with another worker named Eddie Miles and formed a band. In 1957, Richard's stepfather bought him a used drum kit for Christmas. 2 months later, he joined the Eddie Clayton Skiffle Group and played his first real show at the Cavern Club on July 31, 1957. He worked all day at the factory and played music at night. It was the only thing that gave him real joy. In November 1959, he was asked to join another group, the Hurricanes. They needed a real drum kit, and he had one. They changed their name to Rory Storm and the Hurricanes just before he joined. That's when he started calling himself Ringo Starr. He wore a lot of rings, and Starr made him sound like someone meant to be seen. During his solo moments, they called it Star Time, and he sang songs like Boys by the Shirelles. By 1960, Rory Storm and the Hurricanes were bigger in Liverpool than even the Beatles. Then came Hamburg. In October 1960, they were booked to play in Germany's red light district. The city was wild. George Harrison called it the naughtiest city in the world, and Paul McCartney said every woman there was either a stripper or a prostitute. They played all night, took drugs, drank non-stop, and barely slept. It was chaos. On November 29, 1960, Paul and drummer Pete Best were arrested for setting fire to a condom they used for light in their dark room. They were deported on December 1st. Ringo was surrounded by madness, but somehow he survived. During this time, Ringo recorded with John, Paul, and George for the first time when Pete Best couldn't make it. It was October 15, 1960, and they backed Lou Walters on a song called Summertime. That was years before the world knew about the Beatles. Later, in 1961, they recorded Cry for a Shadow with Tony Sheridan, while Ringo and his band struggled to get by. They had no steady money. Ringo even thought about moving to America just to find better chances. But something was pulling him toward those three boys from Liverpool. In early 1962, Pete Best kept missing shows. On February 5, 1962, Ringo filled in again, and George Harrison remembered thinking, "This is it." They wanted Ringo full-time, but he was still under contract with the Hurricanes. That one performance didn't seem important to Ringo, but it was the beginning of something huge. On August 16, 1962, Pete Best was suddenly fired. On August 18th, Ringo officially became a Beatle. But the moment wasn't joyful. Fans were furious. On August 19th at the Cavern Club, half the crowd was chanting, "Pete forever, Ringo never." George Harrison was headbutted in a hallway and showed up with a black eye. People threw things at the stage. Ringo got death threats. For weeks, he was heckled on the streets. He started wondering if this was even worth it. Then came the recording sessions. On September 4th, 1962, he played at Abbey Road for producer George Martin, who wasn't impressed. Just a week later, on September 11th, Martin brought in another drummer, Andy White, and had Ringo play tambourine instead. Ringo was humiliated. He thought, "They're doing to me what they did to Pete." He thought he was finished. During the 1963 tours, the other Beatles tested him with pranks. They hid his drums, lied about show times, and created fake emergencies just to see if he could handle the stress. At one show in Wales, the entire band had to use someone else's instruments because their gear had mysteriously vanished. It was rough, but Ringo stayed calm. Slowly, he earned their trust. He played drums in a strange way because he was left-handed, but used a right-handed kit. That awkward setup made his rhythms sound unique, but he always worried it made him look like a bad drummer. He practiced constantly, scared of being replaced. He even lost sleep over it, but that style became part of the Beatles' sound. It made songs like Love Me Do and Please Please Me feel different from anything else. On June 3, 1964, just before their world tour, Ringo collapsed during a photo shoot. His fever hit 102 degrees, and doctors diagnosed tonsillitis. The band had to decide whether to cancel their biggest American shows or replace him. They brought in a drummer named Jimmy Nicole. Ringo missed 8 shows in Denmark, Holland, and Australia. George Harrison was so upset, he threatened to leave the tour. Ringo didn't want surgery, so he flew to Australia while still sick and rejoined the band on June 15th in Melbourne. One illness nearly ended everything they had built. When the Beatles landed at JFK on February 7, 1964, they had no idea what was waiting. 4,000 fans were already screaming before the doors opened. Ringo stepped out smiling, not realizing he was about to become a magnet for hysteria. His goofy charm made him an instant favorite, but the adoration quickly turned dangerous. Just 4 months later, on June 13th in San Francisco, a crowd of 500 schoolgirls went wild just to see him during a short airport layover. 5 of them collapsed from hysteria. One of them, 18-year-old Helena Rand, was the head of California's Beatles fan club. She managed to give Ringo a surfer shirt before fainting in his arms. Police had to form human shields to stop him from being crushed on the spot. 20 officers barely held the crowd back. Through it all, Ringo kept smiling. He even said, "I enjoy it." But that was just the beginning of what Beatlemania would do to him. While filming A Hard Day's Night in 1964, Ringo's natural wit made him a star on screen. He stole entire scenes without even trying. But behind the charm was exhaustion. On June 3rd, just a day before their world tour, Ringo collapsed during a photo shoot. He had a high fever and was rushed to the hospital with acute tonsillitis. The doctors said he needed rest, but the tour couldn't wait. Jimmy Nicole was paid $2,500 per show to replace him. Ringo thought he was being permanently pushed out. Lying in a hospital bed, he watched someone else sit behind his drums. He returned a week later, but the fear never fully left him. In 1965, the Beatles flew to the Bahamas to shoot Help. They thought it would be a light-hearted adventure, but what they walked into felt like a trap. The political climate was tense, and the locals didn't want a British band stealing headlines. John Lennon drank through the entire ordeal. He later called the experience humiliating and said the local officials insulted them repeatedly. At one point, he nearly lost it and started yelling back. Security became so tight that the band couldn't move without bodyguards. Ringo, usually the peacemaker, felt the tension rising by the hour. It wasn't fun anymore. It felt like survival. By 1966, things had reached a new level. On July 4th and 5, the Beatles played in Manila. The next morning, headlines accused them of snubbing First Lady Imelda Marcos. The reality was, they never agreed to the lunch. But in a country ruled by fear, that didn't matter. Their police protection vanished. At the airport, escalators were shut off. They had to drag their own gear while government thugs in fake military uniforms waved guns and clubs. Brian Epstein was punched. Road manager Mal Evans was kicked and left bleeding on the tarmac. They had to pay 74,450 pesos just to get on a plane. None of them ever returned. By 1967, Ringo was feeling more alone than ever. While recording Sgt. Pepper, his drumming on A Day in the Life would later be called legendary, but at the time he felt invisible. "I learned to play chess," he joked, because he spent hours sitting around while the others experimented with LSD and new sounds. George said it didn't feel like a band anymore. It was Paul at the piano and Ringo keeping time. He barely felt involved, yet the songs wouldn't have worked without him. On August 22, 1968, something snapped. Ringo walked out of Abbey Road. Paul had criticized his drumming on Back in the USSR, and Ringo had enough. He told the others he felt unloved and not good enough. John's reply shocked him. "I thought it was you three." Ringo fled to Sardinia on a yacht and wrote Octopus's Garden while sitting alone at sea. The band begged him to come back. When he returned on September 4th, his drum kit was covered in flowers spelling out, "Welcome back, Ringo." Then came 1969. Yoko Ono had broken the band's silent rule. No wives in the studio. After she and John were in a car crash, John had a hospital bed brought into Abbey Road for her to recover while watching them record. Ringo, stuck in the middle, tried to keep peace. But he watched as the studio turned into a war zone. Yoko joked that heroin was their form of exercise. No one laughed. Ringo couldn't believe what he was hearing. McCartney later said, "It felt like there was a fifth Beatle in the room. And it wasn't just Yoko, it was the drug itself." On September 8, 1969, Ringo was rushed to the hospital with severe intestinal pain. His childhood illness had returned at the worst moment, right in the middle of the Abbey Road sessions. Paul, John, and George quietly wondered if they could finish the album without him. But the fear wasn't just about the music. They were scared of losing their drummer and friend. That week changed something between them. They sensed this might be their last album together, and without Ringo, it would be incomplete. Later that same month, on August 22nd, Ringo saw something even more painful. John and Yoko were tied up in a chair inside Abbey Road, trying to quit heroin cold turkey. For 36 hours, John sweated and screamed, begging for relief. Ringo tried to intervene, but John lashed out. He said the band had driven him to it. That night, John wrote "Cold Turkey" as his body twisted in pain. And days later, he was using again. Ringo watched his friend slip away and couldn't do a thing. In 1970, just before everything fell apart, Ringo was sent to Paul's house with a message. They needed Paul to delay his solo album to make room for Let It Be. Paul exploded. He shouted, poked his finger in Ringo's face, and screamed, "I'll finish you now!" Ringo quietly put on his coat and left. It was the only time their friendship ever turned violent. Later, Ringo wrote a song called Early 1970, where he gently mocked Paul's farm life and hinted at how far apart they had drifted. Then, it happened. On April 10, 1970, Paul told the world the Beatles were over. Ringo found out through the press. No one had told him. He fell into a deep depression, sitting in his garden, staring at the sky, wondering what he would do now that the music had stopped. The man who once feared being replaced now faced a silence no drumbeat could fix. On December 31, 1970, Paul sued the others to dissolve their partnership. Shockingly, Ringo took Paul's side. The other two were furious. They had just claimed their problems with Paul were resolved. The lawsuit made it official. Ringo had chosen a side in the war, and the brotherhood shattered. In April 1971, Ringo released Early 1970 as the B-side to It Don't Come Easy. He sang about each of his old friends. George might play if he's in town. John might jam if he's around. But Paul won't even talk to him. That song was his open wound, quietly bleeding through the speakers. Money became a mess. Alan Klein, who had promised to manage their empire, kept the group's royalties frozen for years. By summer 1971, Paul was paying his band out of pocket just to keep going. Ringo had no control over his own earnings. Even solo albums like Sentimental Journey were buried under legal delays and poor timing. McCartney's album stole the spotlight, and Ringo's project got lost. There was one beautiful moment that almost changed everything. On August 1, 1971, George organized the concert for Bangladesh. John agreed to join until he learned Yoko wasn't invited to perform. 2 days before the show, he stormed out of New York. Paul refused to come at all. Only Ringo showed up. He played alongside George, smiling through heartbreak. The crowd roared, but it wasn't a reunion. It was a farewell in disguise. In March 1970, Ringo's Sentimental Journey hit the shelves. It sold 500,000 copies in 2 weeks and reached number 7 in the UK. But Paul's announcement and album release crushed its momentum. It never went gold. And Ringo realized something hard. No matter how much love he poured into his work, his past with the Beatles would always cast a shadow. Then came 1973. Ringo released Photograph with George Harrison. It reached number 1 in the US, Canada, and Australia. By December, it had sold over 1 million copies. It was Ringo's biggest solo triumph. For one moment, he stood in the spotlight alone, and the world cheered. Years passed. In 1989, he formed the All-Starr Band and returned to the stage for the first time in 23 years. The first shows were shaky. Some called it a joke. But Ringo kept going. He played his classics and his friends' hits. Fans wept when they saw him behind the drums again. The band kept touring for over 30 years. In 1998, he released Vertical Man. It featured George and Paul, and even Ozzy Osbourne and Tom Petty. But Ringo had no money to pay the studio rent. The secretary came to collect and ended up playing cello on the title track. When George mailed his guitar solos, Ringo cried, "You're killing me, George," he whispered. "You've got me crying, you bugger." In 1969, Ringo Starr took a leap into acting with The Magic Christian, playing a homeless man adopted by a billionaire played by Peter Sellers. It sounded fun on paper, but it quickly turned into one of the most uncomfortable experiences of his life. The film was filled with outrageous scenes, including one where money was thrown into a vat filled with blood, urine, and excrement, and people dove in to grab it. Ringo had to be part of scenes that were so explicit, especially the nudity, that he later admitted he was embarrassed and deeply uncomfortable. The tabloids attacked the film, calling it crude and over the top. It was supposed to be satire about greed, but instead, most people just remembered the shock factor. Even with actors like John Cleese, Raquel Welch, and Christopher Lee in the cast, the message got lost. Ringo said, after that, he learned a tough lesson about choosing his roles more carefully. 12 years later, in 1981, he joined Caveman, a comedy that seemed silly but ended up changing his life forever. While filming a stunt, Ringo broke his arm badly and had to stop working for a while. But that delay turned into a blessing, because it gave him more time on set with Barbara Bach, his co-star. They grew closer every day, and not long after filming wrapped, they got married. Barbara later said the stress of that shoot, mixed with Ringo's injury, actually helped build a deeper connection between them. The movie itself was slapstick and strange, but behind the scenes, it created one of the longest celebrity marriages still going. Back in the 1970s, Ringo tried something completely different: furniture design. He launched a company with designer Robin Cruikshank called ROR, which stood for Ringo or Robin. They worked out of the Apple Corps building at 3 Savile Row and even got a $10 million deal to furnish palaces in Abu Dhabi and Oman. One of their tables had an actual Rolls-Royce grill built into it. But their high-end taste didn't click with buyers. Their furniture ended up just sitting in department stores like Liberty and Harvey Nichols, collecting dust. Ringo owned 51% of the company and took a massive hit when the business collapsed by the mid-1980s. The losses were heavy, and the experience showed him that creative vision wasn't always enough if no one was buying. In 1990, fans were heartbroken when Ringo was suddenly replaced on Thomas the Tank Engine. He had been the voice of Mr. Conductor and the narrator since 1984, and children had grown up with his calm, soothing voice. But a contract dispute changed everything. When negotiations fell apart in 1989, producers replaced him with American comedian George Carlin. The backlash was instant. Fans didn't want anyone else. Carlin himself joked that he was now the anti-Pete Best, referring to how Ringo had once replaced the Beatles' original drummer. Carlin re-recorded Ringo's episodes and stayed until season 4. But for many viewers, something magical had been lost. Ringo's personal life was spiraling at the same time. His marriage to Maureen Cox had already been rocky for years when things exploded in 1970. Ringo was drinking too much, cheating, and barely present. Then came the bombshell. One night, Maureen walked in on George Harrison, Ringo's own bandmate, lying in bed with her. George later admitted at dinner, right in front of Ringo, "I'm in love with your wife." Ringo didn't yell or fight. He just said, "Better you than someone we don't know." But the end came in 1974, when Maureen caught Ringo with American model Nancy Lee Andrews. Their divorce became official on July 17, 1975. Ringo paid Maureen $125,000 up front, $23,000 a year, and $2,500 for each of their 3 kids. She got full custody, and Ringo got visitation. Things got darker in the late 1970s. Ringo's cocaine use was out of control. In 1978, he overdosed so badly he had to be rushed to the hospital. He later said he would drink 16 bottles of wine in a day and barely eat anything because the cocaine killed his appetite. His stepdaughter Francesca said the house was like a drug den, with him and Barbara hiding from the world, drinking and using every day. Ringo admitted later that entire years of his life were a blur. He had photos of himself on stage across the globe, but said, "I have no memory of it." The breaking point came in 1988. One Friday afternoon, Ringo woke up confused and in shock. His staff told him he had destroyed the house so badly they thought it had been burglarized. Worse, they found Barbara so bruised and beaten they thought she might be dead. That horrifying moment forced both of them to check into a rehab center in Tucson, Arizona, just 2 weeks later. During court testimony in 1989, Ringo admitted he knew he had a drinking problem as far back as 1982, but didn't know how to stop. He said he'd been drinking 16 bottles of wine a day. The violence and trauma of that one day became the rock bottom that pushed him toward recovery. That same year, 1980, Ringo was dragged back into court. His ex-wife, Maureen, demanded new terms for custody and financial support. Her lawyers painted him as an out-of-control addict who couldn't be trusted with his children. She even called him a sodding great Andy Capp, comparing him to the cartoon drunk who always cheated on his wife. Even though Ringo had already given her full custody in 1975, the legal fight turned bitter. Maureen spent over $200,000 in legal fees and lost. The judge said Ringo had actually increased her yearly payments voluntarily and had been generous. But the public got a raw look at how unstable his life had become. In 2024, Ringo was 84 and still touring when everything came to a sudden stop. He got sick right before a show in Philadelphia, and doctors told him to rest. He had to cancel that night's concert and another one at Radio City Music Hall. Fans were stunned. He had already completed 10 of 12 shows on his fall tour and had played at the Greek Theater in Los Angeles, where his All-Starr Band had launched 35 years earlier. Even though he said he felt fit as a fiddle and still worked out every day, the cancellations reminded everyone how fragile life had become. Then came his 85th birthday on July 7, 2025. It should have been a simple party, but instead, it became emotional for fans around the world. Beverly Hills declared it Ringo Starr Day. But what people remembered most was his tearful message. For the first time, Ringo publicly mourned John Lennon and George Harrison during the noon Peace and Love moment. The yearly tradition had started with just 100 fans in Chicago in 2008. Now it spanned 30 countries. This year, NASA even helped beam his message to the moon and back. That moment became more than a birthday. It became a memorial. And just when people thought he might slow down, Ringo revealed he wasn't done yet. He announced in 2025 that he had finished not one, but 2 country albums. One of them was with T-Bone Burnett and set for release in 2026. When reporters asked if he was finally retiring, Ringo laughed and said his kids were sick of hearing that line for the past 10 years. The new album would even include a Carl Perkins cover, honoring one of the musicians who shaped the Beatles' early sound. Ringo said every time someone called and offered a gig, he was ready to pack up and go. But even with all the love and success, 2025 brought some heavy shadows too. His charity, the Lotus Foundation, had raised millions from his art shows, especially a recent one in Las Vegas. He created wild spin art using a modified Rolls-Royce engine, and every penny went to causes like cancer research and addiction support. But then came whispers from the Pandora Papers. They revealed Ringo had 5 offshore trusts in Panama and the Bahamas that handled his royalties and tour income. There was no proof of wrongdoing, But people started asking whether his charity was being mixed with tax shelter tactics. Ringo stayed silent, letting the numbers speak. His art still raised huge sums for good causes. But the pressure from the media was real.